outside the ancient gates of Jerusalem. The absolute ruler of the fastest-growing empire on earth stood in the dust. He wore no crown. No shimmering silks or gold-woven robes caught the light, nor any royal procession announced his arrival. His garments were worn down by hundreds of miles of brutal desert terrain, repaired so many times that later chroniclers would count exactly 17 patches on his cloak. He arrived on foot, walking with a stark simplicity that mirrored the harsh landscape he had crossed from Medina. Looking down from the high walls, Patriarch Sophronius, a man accustomed to the blinding, opulent majesty of the Roman imperial court, could scarcely believe his eyes. The leader who had shattered the legions of Rome and dismantled the armies of Persia was not arriving with fire and sword, but walking quietly through the dust. To understand how history arrived at this extraordinary moment, we must first understand Jerusalem itself. For thousands of years, the city had been more than a geographical location. It was a profound symbol. Empires measured their prestige by possessing it, and pilgrims crossed deserts and seas simply to pray within its walls. For Jews, Christians, and later Muslims, it held a religious significance unlike almost any other place on earth. By the early 7th century, Jerusalem belonged to the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome. Although the empire had survived for centuries, decades of exhausting war against the Sasanian Persian Empire had drained its treasury and weakened its armies. Even after Emperor Heraclius achieved a remarkable victory over the Persians and restored Byzantine control, the empire emerged victorious but thoroughly depleted. Few could have imagined that the next great challenge would come not from another ancient empire, but from the arid expanses of the Arabian Peninsula. Early Islamic tradition notes that even during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime, Emperor Heraclius had anticipated the rise of this new power, reportedly remarking that the followers of the new faith would one day rule the very land on which he stood. Only a few years after the Prophet's death, events began unfolding with astonishing speed. Under the leadership of the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, Muslim armies moved north into Byzantine territory, seeking to secure a region left deeply unstable by generations of imperial warfare. The decisive turning point came in 636 at the Battle of Yarmouk. Fought near the Yarmouk River in modern-day Jordan, it became one of the most consequential engagements in medieval history. Facing a significantly larger Byzantine force, the Muslim army achieved a victory that permanently altered the political map of the Near East. The defeat shattered Byzantine control over much of Syria, leaving ancient cities that had long relied on imperial protection suddenly isolated. One after another, Damascus and other strategic strongholds fell to the advancing forces. Only one great prize remained: Jerusalem. Protected by formidable walls and revered across the Christian world, the city represented far more than another military objective. Its capture carried immense political and religious weight. Muslim forces surrounded Jerusalem, beginning a siege that lasted several months. Yet unlike many medieval sieges remembered for slaughter and destruction, this campaign moved toward an entirely different resolution. Inside the city, the elderly Patriarch Sophronius faced an impossible choice. He understood that relief from Constantinople would not arrive, and that continued resistance would only bring immense suffering to Jerusalem's inhabitants. Negotiation offered the only realistic path, but Sophronius attached one remarkable condition to the surrender. He would not yield the city to a general. He would hand its keys only to the leader of the Muslims himself. This request was extraordinary. In the 7th century, rulers rarely appeared at the front lines, choosing instead to remain behind palace walls while generals accepted victories in their name. Yet upon learning of Sophronius's condition, Umar chose a different path. He set out from Medina accompanied by only a handful of companions. As the journey continued north, news spread rapidly across Syria that the conqueror of Jerusalem was approaching. Many expected an emperor in shining armor, surrounded by soldiers and court officials. Byzantine rulers had long projected authority through elaborate ceremonies, jeweled robes, and overwhelming displays of imperial power. Instead, those waiting would encounter something entirely different. Outside Damascus, Umar was welcomed by Abu Ubaidah, one of the commanders responsible for the Muslim victories in Syria. The generals had prepared a formal reception worthy of the head of a rapidly expanding empire, but it became immediately clear that this ceremony meant little to the Caliph. His clothes bore the marks of countless repairs, containing exactly 17 patches. Rather than replacing them with the expensive garments offered by his companions, he chose to keep wearing the same coarse robe he had left Medina in. The final approach to Jerusalem produced one of the most famous scenes in Islamic historical tradition. Thousands of people were waiting beyond the city walls, diplomats, soldiers, clergy, and citizens expected to witness the arrival of one of the most powerful rulers of the age. As they approached Jerusalem, dust rose beneath their feet while the city's walls loomed larger with every step. The scene puzzled many of those watching from a distance, becoming clear only when the Muslim commanders hurried forward to greet the man walking in lean, patched clothes. Inside Jerusalem, Sophronius prepared for a meeting unlike any he had expected. For months he had negotiated with the representatives of a victorious army. Now he was about to hand the keys of one of Christianity's holiest cities to a leader who had arrived without a crown. The gates of Jerusalem were slowly opened. The city fell in absolute silence, with not a single shout of victory breaking the quiet stillness of the lanes. Patriarch Sophronius stepped forward to greet a ruler dressed like an ordinary traveler, handing over the keys to one of the most sacred cities in human history. Unlike many medieval conquests, Jerusalem did not descend into massacre or widespread destruction. Instead, early Muslim sources describe negotiations that resulted in a formal agreement protecting the city's inhabitants. Today, historians refer to this agreement as the Pact of Umar. While scholars continue to debate the exact wording preserved in later manuscripts, its central purpose remains undisputed. The Christian population received guarantees for their lives, their property, and their places of worship in return for accepting the new administration. For the 7th century, such an arrangement was remarkable. Religious wars often ended with exile, forced conversion, or total devastation. But Jerusalem experienced something different. Soon afterward, Umar was taken through the city by Sophronius himself. They walked together through streets that had witnessed Roman emperors, Persian armies, and countless pilgrims over the centuries. Eventually, they reached the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site revered by Christians as the place of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. As they stood inside, the time for prayer arrived, and Sophronius invited Umar to pray within the church itself. Umar politely declined. According to early Muslim tradition, he feared that if he prayed there, later generations might claim the church as a mosque simply because the Caliph had worshipped within its walls. He stepped outside and performed his prayer in the open, only a short distance from the entrance. Centuries later, a small mosque would be built near that location, while the Church of the Holy Sepulchre remained in Christian hands. As the tour continued, Sophronius led the Caliph to the Temple Mount, a place sacred to Jews and later to Muslims, but neglected for generations under Byzantine rule. According to early Muslim chronicles, parts of the site had become covered with debris and refuse. Without ceremony, Umar bent down and began clearing it with his own hands, and his companions quickly joined him. Together they cleaned the ground that would later become home to some of Islam's most recognizable landmarks. For Jerusalem's Jewish community, the city's change in leadership marked an equally profound turning point. Under Byzantine rule, Jews had been barred for centuries from living in or freely entering Jerusalem following imperial restrictions. Umar reversed that policy after the city's surrender, allowing Jewish families to return and settle once again. He designated an area near the Temple Mount where they could live and practice their faith openly, marking the end of generations of exclusion. The city had changed rulers, but more importantly, it had changed hands without becoming another chapter of destruction. The example left by Umar would not be forgotten. More than 5 centuries later, another Muslim commander approached Jerusalem. His name was Salahuddin. After defeating the Crusader kingdom at the Battle of Hattin in 1187, he recovered the city that had been lost during the First Crusade. Unlike the bloody conquest carried out by the Crusaders in 1099, Salahuddin chose negotiation over revenge. Medieval Muslim scholars describe him consciously following the example established by Umar centuries earlier, granting protection to non-Muslim civilians and avoiding indiscriminate slaughter. More than 13 centuries have now passed since Umar entered Jerusalem. Historians continue to debate individual details preserved in early chronicles and later traditions. Yet, on one point, there is remarkable agreement. His peaceful entry into Jerusalem became one of the defining moments of medieval history. It stands out not because it marked the fall of one empire or the rise of another, but because, in an age when cities were routinely won through fire and blood, one of history's holiest places changed hands through negotiation, restraint, and political vision.